Thanks so much for joining us today on The Media Mindset. I'm your host, David Tao. I'm also joined by host Nick English today. And we have a very special guest on the podcast today, a dear old friend of mine, Paul Schaefer. Paul, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Just to kick things off, if you wouldn't mind giving the listeners a bit of background on your career and how you came to be where you are today. You're the first performer we've had on the podcast, so very excited to hear your perspective.
I'm very, very excited to be here. So I was always a performer ever since I was a kid, and I got into singing when I was in middle school. I started training and taking as much voice lessons as I could, and I started doing shows in middle school. I did shows in high school, and eventually I started auditioning for different musical theater colleges. I have to say, I wasn't very passionate about it. It was kind of something that kind of happened naturally. I had the skill set, and then I trained it, so I really worked really hard on it, but I wasn't really what I would consider to be an artist. I was just doing what felt right. I ended up going to the University of Michigan and getting a kind of a specialized degree in musical theater, and then after that I was showcased in New York, and I did a lot of waiting gigs for a while while I was auditioning for different things. And within about 2 years, I ended up starting booking different regional shows, different off-Broadway shows that I did. I did a couple little TV gigs here and there. And then I ended up booking a national tour of something called Thoroughly Modern Millie, which was a show that was done in the 90s that was all jazz and fun and tap dancing, and I was always a good hoofer, so I kind of slipped right into that really easily. That was a tour that I did for about a year and a half, and then I came back, and about 6 months later I booked the show The Phantom of the Opera. So I was 27 at the time, and I have been in that show ever since, and that was in 2007. So I've done about 12 years of that show now, and up to probably around 4,000 performances. I don't really count because I think I'd lose my mind if I did. I've been able, luckily, because Phantom is so good to me, I've been able to leave for a variety of different gigs as well, different shows, different TV things as well, because they like to keep us fresh, so they do give us a lot of opportunity outside of the show. So, and here I am today. Currently I'm in the middle of a 2-show day right now.
Well, thanks for joining us. This was, in scheduling, I think this was one of the more interesting kind of scheduling puzzles that we've had to work, because it's Paul's available from this time, and from this time he'll be on stage here, he'll be on stage here. So, yeah. But before we continue, if you wouldn't mind going a little bit more into your work on Phantom. You've played a variety of roles in the show, and have a very, very long tenure there. So,
well, as you know, I cover both the leads in the show, and the leads are the Phantom himself and Raoul Vicomte de Chagny, who's a kind of a French elitist guy. You've seen me play the Phantom.
I've never seen you play Raoul
in person, but you've never seen me play Raoul.
I hear it's great.
And so I've played each of those parts over the years. 400 or 500 times as basically an understudy when the lead gets sick or has a vacation or something like that. I'm one of the people they call upon to kind of cover that track. Otherwise, I'm in the ensemble every night, and I do a variety of small little parts kind of supporting the story.
Very cool. So I'm interested in learning more about how the craft of acting has evolved during your time. Since you've been an actor? You've been acting for 10, 15 years now?
I've been in this city for about 20 years. Mostly 20 years, and because I've done a variety of gigs outside of the city. I think in general, I think shows have become more expensive, and the production value has gone way up. And we can talk about this later, but the marketing production costs have really gone up. And I think that as an actor, that means that the ensembles have been actually reduced and getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And so those actors then and dancers have to be capable of doing so many different things. Let alone if you get a show like King Kong or Spider-Man or Harry Potter or something like that, where they have flying or they have gymnastics or they have a variety of tricks that you have to know. So you have to be, more and more these shows are requiring multifaceted performers.
Yeah, because I understand that, obviously now people are consuming digital media more than ever, but is it true that attendance is also increasing in live theater at the same time?
Attendance?
Yeah.
There was a period of time around 9/11 and some of the the financial depression and stuff like that, where there was some talk of Broadway finally collapsing. Like this was going to be the end of this era of live shows. And then a variety of shows challenged that theory, Hamilton being the largest one. There's literally something called like the Hamilton effect, where Broadway literally exploded. And they've never, I think this year is actually our largest box office. We've made the most money in New York as a result of these great shows that have come in than any other year that they've done. So it's just really exploded, and a lot of producers are actually getting in on it because if a show hits, like they stand to make a ton of money. The problem is that most shows don't hit, so it is a high risk investment. But these guys always have like 10 projects going on at the same time.
So I moved to New York in 2011, and that was right around the time that the phenom was the Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
And that was. I remember I was writing for Fortune at the time. I was writing for Fortune.com at the time, and someone I sat next to wrote this really big article series about the Broadway Renaissance and how Broadway had battled back from after the financial crisis when attendance was down, and how shows like the Book of Mormon were really saving it, and how the industry had a bright future. I think that was the first year Neil Patrick Harris hosted the Tonys. Like things were just on the up and up. And then Hamilton hit, and it was like that times about 10.
Yep.
Do you think that the growth of Broadway is dependent on these like really just runaway hit shows? Or do you think that the industry, can sustain itself or sustain a level of growth, say if it's another 5 or 10 years before the next Book of Mormon or the next Hamilton or the next, Harry Potter and the Cursed Child?
No, I don't think so, because every year there's more contemporary crossover shows. So Harry Potter's a crossover show. Book of Mormon was the South Park creators coming in. So more and more, like Moulin Rouge is coming out this year. These are shows that have huge followings that are outside of the theater world, and they're also super contemporary. Moulin Rouge is using, half their book is actually music from the last 10 years. And I think that the Cher show, there's all these shows right now that are coming out about megastars that are, these were people who were major singing celebrities from the last 20 years or so. And I think that Broadway has modernized itself in such a way to make it more relevant. And I think the Hamiltons will keep coming.
Gotcha.
There's a show called Hadestown right now, which looks like it's gonna just sweep everything right now. And I just think that like they're very smart about how they make these shows now and how they market these shows and what audiences they're looking for. We can get more into like how these shows now have more national followings before the national tours get out. We can talk about how they drop cameras onto the stage with 3D ability to wrap around that you can then control the camera and see the shows happening in live action. We can talk about how Rent just turned, a live action version of Rent just got popped up, and it was a huge thing. JC Superstar came out recently on TV. These are all these crossover things that are happening that I think raise Broadway up and make it more, accessible. Yeah. More popular.
I mean, that was definitely something I wanted to learn about, especially in the time that you've been doing theater, how the marketing has evolved and how digital has been brought into it more so. Like what are the biggest changes that you've seen there? Like since you've been in shows, how's the marketing been changing?
I see this either kind of compression of media, like we'll talk about a show like Dolly was revived, and that was a huge hit, but they made all their actors and all the performers sign NDAs and weren't allowed to take pictures, weren't allowed to post anything, weren't allowed to do anything. You could not know what that show looked like until you showed up and saw the show. And they knew they could get away with it because they had a star in the lead and they knew that it was gonna be so popular, but it made this kind of mysterious kind of thing happen. Most shows now are making the actors do NDAs and make sure that it's super, super compressed. So they're coming up with this one vision. It's much more like the production of a movie or something like that, where they're in super control of it. I think some shows are opening with a bit more of a relaxed state because they're realizing that performers, we have to maintain a certain social media presence. And I think Moulin Rouge is actually trying to move more towards. I'm sorry, I don't mean to plug Moulin Rouge as much. My wife's in Moulin Rouge, so it's kind of fun to plug it.
Plug away.
But there is a media presence. All of these people are these like gorgeous people with these huge media presences. Some of them are original actors from Hamilton and stuff like that, and they're using them and their following to kind of create this more networked marketing campaign. And I think that that's a much smarter take on what's happening today anyway. But in general, to answer your question, I think actors have to, we have to maintain these presences that are the kind of these fully fleshed out human presence. You know, like I think it's funny because like if you're a model or if you're interested in one particular facet of life, right? We create an Instagram account for that, and it's all about that one thing. And I often think that actors have to be a bit more rich in how they promote themselves. We have to kind of expose our lives a little bit. We have to give them a story, our fans a story, so that they feel like they're a part of our lives to some extent.
It's got to feel authentic.
Yes, it has to feel authentic. And as opposed to like a brand it becomes more, my wife is so good at this, at creating a whole lifestyle around this identity. And she has a ton of fans who love her for all of the many facets of what she does and what she is. And I think actors really have to be these fleshed out people. I always think of Chris Helmsworth, his account.
Oh, yeah.
You know, because he's just like, he like talks about his wife all the time. He talks about his fitness stuff all the time. He like shoots all these casual stuff about his movies and stuff like that. And it's like this, it's like who he is. You know that's who he is, or at least I think that's who he is.
People root for his characters, but they root for him too. They want to see him succeed because they feel like they have a buy-in to the person behind the character.
Right.
I found it really interesting, and having known you for over 7 years now, and kind of seeing how your digital presence has grown and how you've curated that and how you kind of present the richness of your life. You know, you're not just posting about your performance, you're posting about your fitness goals. You're posting about your pottery, which is something I'd love for you to get into a little bit. You're posting about your hobbies. You know, what is the response that you've generally gotten from that? Is it always positive? Is it sometimes like they want you to post more of one thing and they're kind of asking why aren't you posting about that? Why are you posting this other stuff?
Well, I have to say, in particular, Phantom fans are incredible and very, very tenacious. So as wonderful as they are, they definitely like want more of particular things. I think that I think some of what I represent in on my Instagram profile, at least, some of it excites some people and some of it doesn't, you know? And I think I try not to push too hard in any particular direction. I just try to be like, you know, I try to honor events as they come and then try to be varied, so that it's hitting a wider audience. Because I know I have a lot of pottery fans, which is interesting. I've been doing wheel pottery for the last couple of years, and I'm actually going into like more like making projects for people and stuff like that, and I really love it.
You're doing commissions now, right?
I'm doing some commissions, and it's making me really nervous, but it's fun. So I have like this really interesting group of pottery fans who are watching me, but then they're exposed to like my theatrical world, or they're exposed to my fitness world. These are different worlds. You know, and then I'll like put up a video of me squatting or something, or me doing like some heavy weight work or something like that. And I'm sure the pottery people are like, what is happening? Or they're like, that's interesting, I'm learning something, or I'm being exposed to something new. Maybe that's interesting, you know? And then let alone the kind of the heavy stuff, which is more of like, I'm an actor, I'm in Phantom, this is what I do mostly. So I think it's interesting to have these multiple interests, let alone like I talk about my relationship or something like that. Like that, there is just so many interesting parts of that. I never really thought about it, but that makes sense to me. Yeah.
Is it pretty much completely Instagram where actors are focusing their efforts, or is there much of a push on Twitter? Was Snapchat like briefly a thing?
In terms of like higher level of celebrities and stuff like that, I'm sure that they hit multiple platforms and stuff like that more often. It seems to be a push away from Facebook. And then there seems to be this elevated Instagram presence, which is interesting because Facebook owns it.
Which is Facebook, yeah.
That's Facebook going good. They think they're getting away from us, but...
and And then like it's like the multi-platform hit. So if I post something, it's going to go everywhere, But I think Instagram is really mostly what actors are using and what most of the fans I think are using. But I'm not educated enough to know that. I think that's what's happening.
Yeah, I've been seeing. I saw recently like a course aimed at young actors, like in the digital age. Like it's sort of like teaching you how to be an actor in the digital age, and it's sort of like how you need to learn how to not just like use social media, but like also like the ins and outs of performing in like webisodes or podcasts and that sort of thing, and how this is like this sort of new type of training that actors are getting that they didn't used to get.
Yeah, and we do a lot of self-taping too for auditions and stuff like that. I don't think there's a particular there is a technique to like being in front of a camera and setting yourself up that so you look good in front of the camera, so that you're doing good work in front of the camera. Like there's some like no-nos that you should not do, like look directly at the camera or do a variety of different things. Yeah, exactly. Don't look directly at the cameras. But I think that that's going to happen more and more and more, obviously. The webisode work is really exciting because there's such great cameras out there that you can buy, and you can actually, like I run like an amateur TV group that like regularly shoots scenes and stuff like that, and they're shorts, and it's really fun, and we learn a ton trying to edit these things and trying to produce these things, and like act in different parts and stuff like that. And who knows where that will end up, but like I think a lot of other people are also doing that.
Yeah.
So I think content is becoming more and more, so we have to know what we're doing.
When you're doing webisodes, is that like primarily to improve at the craft of like production, or is it also is the intent for it to spread and to build more of a career in webisodes?
Everything.
The whole thing.
It's to learn how to do it, and it's also to expand, get a good reel going so that you can say, look what I've done. It's also to create individual products that you hope then get picked up.
Right.
Like look at Broad City. Like that had to have started as a web series. Like it's just too perfect, and it has that style about it.
I have a friend who's literally yesterday went through the Tribeca Creators Program, which is the Tribeca Film Festival, getting together creators who have shot web series or pilots and putting them in front of networks and established networks, and also I guess you could call them online-only networks like Netflix, Amazon Video, things like that. Yeah. And the one thing they mentioned is you need to. I was talking to my buddy Vishal, who was fortunate enough to go through that process, and he's like, you walk in and they're asking to not only see what you've produced, but they really do care about your online presence and how you're presenting yourself as a creative. And one thing I wanted to ask is, in the world of social media and these curated actor presences, do you think that's increased the barrier to entry for new actors?
It's kind of a sad idea, isn't it? Like we used to joke, I think like 5-10 years ago, that like, oh, you need to have an Instagram following if you're gonna book any show.
But is that the case, for better or for worse?
I think in this day and age, when you walk in the room and you have a large Instagram following, you are definitely considered more, because they know that it can drive up sales. They know it can drive up exposure. I also think that in a lot of cases, we have to create, like I said, this kind of fully fleshed out profile on us. We have to create this energy, to create this character, so that when we walk in the room, the people who are casting us, they know already what they're seeing. I think it adds to the attraction. I think it adds to it fleshes us out more, because sometimes we're only in a room for 3 minutes or something like that. It's super quick, and like I think it creates some depth for them. And so, yeah, I think it is affecting casting a ton.
So the question is, which Paul Schaefer are we getting? Are we getting the actual Paul Schaefer, or are you just playing him on TV right now?
I think that there is a lot about acting in terms of like presenting yourself and like trying to present yourself in the best way possible. So I'm certainly trying to present myself in the best way possible right now.
Well, you're doing a great job.
Oh, good.
I have some notes.
Okay.
Where do you think, so you've seen where Broadway's come during a time of much change. I don't want to say tumultuous time, because it seems like Broadway is doing well. Now it's been, I'm sure, not always easy from the performers and actors' perspective to have to deal with these changes and to have to grow this online presence, which was something that wasn't necessarily a consideration 15, 20 years ago. How do you see that evolving over the next 5 to 10 years? How will the Broadway actor's life be different than it is now?
Well, I think online presence, I think the stories, in terms of Instagram stories and stuff like that, is something that's being utilized endlessly. There's something that a lot of Broadway shows do, and they allow the cast members to do Instagram takeovers of the show's actual account.
Interesting.
This happens a ton. It happened this week with one of our ensemble members actually ended up taking over the account. And what they end up producing is this high volume day. I mean, it's literally like these people put up like 45, 50, different videos of going throughout their whole day, brushing their teeth, going to dance class, like having coffee, and they're just like, it's basically a kind of a shot into the world of what this actor is doing that day.
Yeah, on
throughout
a very
the whole
granular
day.
level.
Oh yeah, throughout the whole day. Into the show, into like seeing different cast members, into like, it's just a ton of production. When we do it, when the media departments in these shows ask the actors to do it, it's like we have to take a deep breath and we're like, okay, I'm up for this. And it's because it's a huge content builder for us, and it is a lot of work, but it's fun, and it gives a good, interesting perspective. I think that stuff is going to be used more and more. Like I said, I think shows need to integrate the followings and maximize their performers' ability to kind of promote on social media so much, and I think that's what's going to happen. I think the actors just have to continue to kind of like add content, more and more content that's attractive to people, and flesh out their identities more. I just think it's going to keep going down that way. I can't think of anything else, but I don't know. It's like this stuff shifts like crazy too. I don't know like what innovative thing is going to be happening around the corner in terms of like what they're going to expect of us now, but it keeps shifting like crazy.
I've heard some people throw out VR, virtual reality, and Broadway as something that is coming up in the near future. I don't know a ton about the VR space. I think we're gonna have some guests in the near future who might know a lot more about it. But what is your gut reaction to hearing something like that?
Well, VR might be interesting in a live show if like they could put somebody with some kind of equipment on them in the middle of the stage. Like then you would be watching the lead go through or a character go through that process. That would be fascinating. Like imagine like the exposure of that, like the idea of giving a person who's watching this or experiencing this because of the VR, like the ability to go through what we go through, to see, to hear and feel the audience, to interact with the people on stage. Like, but it would have to be so, like the technology would have to be so inconspicuous that you can't actually see it on stage. But that would be amazing.
It could be inconspicuous, or it could be a plot device. I mean, there could be. I think it's a question of when, not if, personally, and that's going to get a ton of press. Like, there's no way that doesn't get a ton of press and create a lot of conversation, positive and negative, if and when that happens.
I think I don't. Strangely, I usually have negative responses to that, and I don't have a negative response to that. I think that's a great idea.
Interesting.
Yeah. Because I'm like, preserve live theater. Live theater should only be seen, in person, blah, 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 blah. And I think to some extent that's important. But I think giving people experiences like that isn't giving away the show. I think it's actually just exposing a completely different facet of it. I don't know.
So in this world where theater and digital media are becoming like increasingly intertwined, for smaller productions who don't have these like gigantic budgets or gigantic followings, like what sort of advice would you have to them to improve their marketing?
The production?
Yeah, when they're smaller.
Well, a lot of shows start really small. So what is that show? Be More Chill. Be More Chill.
Yeah, I know Be More Chill.
Yeah, that's a great example for this, because they started in this kind of small theater, and they developed this huge media following. And the only reason they went to Broadway was because of that media following. It was like the first show that ever, like their fan base was so large as a result of their media following that they successfully made this huge multi-million-dollar transfer. They attracted producers. So that's a great example of, a show really using that and using
Yeah. I don't know. I went to Who's Your Bag Daddy last year, which is a terrible name for a production, but it had they had this whole thing where Larissa Olenek, the girl who played Alex Mack, was in the production, so I was very excited about it. And if you like post a picture of yourself there and use a hashtag, then like they promised that like one of the actors would like return and like send you a story like thanking you for posting the hashtag with it. And
That's cool.
Yeah, and I think I don't know.
Did they?
Yeah,
Get back to you?
yeah, they did, but it was a different actor, which was kind of sad. I really wanted Alex Mack to talk to me, but certainly like with something that small, it seems like that's something that even if you have like a small social media presence, that can like the promise of getting an actor to send something to you is like a way to help build a hashtag or something.
Well, certainly in the last 5 years, a lot of shows in their playbills and small shows as well have created like, hey, if you take pictures, please connect to this Instagram account or something like that. Please tag us here. So I think that's happening more and more in the official playbills and stuff like that, which has never happened before.
Yeah.
You know, because they're kind of assuming you're going to take pictures, we're going to yell at you for taking pictures, but in case you do, please tag us anyway. You know, it's an interesting contradiction, but.
Yeah, it's just got to be so much harder to build it. Like from when you have productions where you can have actors with large followings as it is, and to be able to manipulate that into like a larger following, that's like, there's at least a playbook for that. But when they're really small sorts of productions, like you got to wonder like how they can thrive where the digital marketing aspect is so important, you know?
Yeah.
It is interesting that we see a lot of these strategies of leveraging social media influence and followings in the major productions. That, for a time, was how smaller productions, web series really got off the ground. They try and find someone who has a big social media following, even if the production itself is very low budget, and try and use that as a way to kind of level up and get in front of more people. Now we see the biggest shows borrowing a playbook from this, guerrilla marketing, social media marketing. It's an interesting question. Like, how do these smaller productions stay ahead if their playbook is now being used by the big guns? I don't know. Very interesting.
I saw you did some pretty small productions back in 2013.
I did some tiny productions back then.
They were very small.
They were about as small as you could. We had someone recently on the podcast who we were talking about micro influencers, which is people with like 10,000 followers aggregate on social media. And below that you have pico influencers, which is below like 1,000.
Nano influencers after that?
It was, I think it's nano and then pico's below nano actually, because nano was too broad.
Right.
The shows I did, those were pico productions. So
How do you market a pico production?
you don't. At least we didn't do
You
it.
tell your friends to tell your friends.
Yeah, we didn't do a great job of it. We asked Nick English to please buy a ticket.
Yeah, that's it. Well, it worked. It worked on me.
Hey, but those small productions are really trying to work like startups. They're really trying to catch an eye so that they can be produced and go into a larger venue. So it's like that's where a lot of those that's why a lot of those small productions are created. Not just for the art, they're actually looking for the commercial end of it.
Well, excellent. We're getting toward the end of our time today, but Paul, is there anything else you'd like to add regarding your life as a performer and how the age of digital content has changed that for better or worse?
What comes to mind from that question is, it's amazing how in the world, right, we all have to we're all more exposed, right? We put more content up about our lives and stuff like that. And that exposes us that gives us less privacy. And I think more and more I have to accept as a performer that I have to embrace kind of just exposing my life in that way on a regular basis. My wife has a pretty strong media profile and stuff like that, and she constantly talks about different aspects of our lives and different things that she's doing, and I respond to those things, and people are watching these interactions happen all the time, and it's an interesting feeling to not have that much privacy, to not have anything that is just between us, in that world or in our world. I'm sure there are some aspects of our relationship and our lives that are more private, but to be honest with you, most of what we do is immediately broadcast into the world, and for a purpose too. To not just for our friends and not just for our family and stuff like that, but also for our fan bases and for the people who are interested in seeing us in shows and seeing us work and stuff like that. And I just think that that's an interesting idea.
Well, Paul, where can people follow you if they want all all the details of what you're doing, whether it be performance, fitness, pottery.
If they want to contribute to the destruction of your privacy that you loathe so much.
My website is paulschaefer.nyc. That's SCHAEFER. Also, my Instagram is Paul Adam Schaefer. So come take a look, and I'd love to have you guys come into my home and see every aspect of my life. No, but seriously, like I love the fans of Phantom, and I love the fans of all the shows that my wife does and everything, and I am very grateful to them.
Excellent. Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today. Really
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yeah.